Now you can listen to The Point on radio.com. And radio.com gives you so much more. Local news stations give you what's going on in your community, yet national news from CBS, CNN, or Fox News Radio. Take a break with one of the hundreds of music, sports, and talk stations. Love podcasts? Radio.com has thousands of true crime, comedy, kids and family podcasts, and more. Listen anytime, anywhere. On your PC, smart speakers, and a variety of connected devices. Or download the radio.com app now from the App Store or Google Play.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Trying to get them out. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. The thousands of Americans still in Afghanistan after the rapid takeover by the Taliban.
Our focus right now is on doing the work at hand and on the task at hand. And that is day by day, getting as many American citizens, as many SIV applicants, as many members of a vulnerable population who are eligible to be evacuated to the airport and out on planes.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the Taliban promises they will allow Americans to leave, but reports persist of Taliban fighters blocking access to the airport in Kabul. Former President Trump calls what's happened in Afghanistan the greatest embarrassment in the history of our country.
We have all of those thousands of Americans over there and others. Biden put us in this position. He should have gotten the civilians out first.
And he tells Fox's Hannity when his administration was negotiating with the Taliban, they made it clear that if any Americans were harmed, there would be an overwhelming military response. The Taliban has ordered Afghan citizens to hand over their weapons and ammunition to authorized Taliban members. If you're planning to book holiday air travel this year, you'll still need a face mask.
A mask mandate on U.S. transportation systems will be extended through January 18th, regardless of vaccination status. The requirement was set to expire next month. A spokesperson for the Transportation Security Administration says the mask directive is to minimize the spread of COVID-19 on public transportation. The face covering requirement applies to passengers at airports, on commercial flights, commuter buses, and rail systems.
Fox's Jared Halpern. Thousands of people in Northern California are without power on purpose. Their utility, Pacific Gas and Electric, shutting down some of its transmission lines to prevent sparking and gusty winds and potentially more wildfires. America is listening to Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
A homeowner's policy protects much more than just your house. It also protects you against claims from someone being hurt on your property. If a visitor is injured at your place, how much are you covered for? The smart thing to do is get the answer today.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
The governor of Texas, who has insisted there be no mask mandates in schools in his state, is now corona positive.
The office of Governor Greg Abbott released a statement saying Abbott undergoes daily testing for COVID, and Tuesday, the test came back positive. The plan is for him to isolate in the governor's mansion. While the statement says Abbott is not experiencing any symptoms and is fully vaccinated, he is still receiving monoclonal antibody treatment from Regeneron. Abbott's office announced this the same day that the state health department requested 5 mortuary trailer trucks from FEMA. As of Tuesday, the state health department reported 4,300 new probable COVID cases. Just under 55% of the state's population has had at least one vaccine dose. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
Customs and Border Protection says its agents have seized thousands of fake COVID-19 vaccine cards in dozens of shipments bound for U.S. cities. They say they were easy to spot with poor quality printing and misspellings. A Connecticut college is adding a financial disincentive to unvaccinated students.
Quinnipiac University is threatening students to either get the COVID vaccine, get get an exemption or face a heavy helping of fines. The college sent out an email saying students that don't comply and roll up their sleeves will be charged $100 a week for the first 2 weeks of the upcoming semester. The fines will rise from there. A student who disobeys the vaccine mandate could ultimately pay $2,275 by the end of the semester. A Quinnipiac spokesperson saying so far, 600 students have not uploaded their vaccine information. Tom Graham, Fox News.
Admitting that hackers have accessed some of its billing files, T-Mobile now says they have identified the data taken as being from a file containing data on inactive prepaid cell phone accounts. The company says no customer financial information or Social Security numbers were stolen in the files. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Top End Pest Control is who you call for all your pest control needs. Got a problem with roaches, ants, spiders, rodents, fleas, ticks, termites? No problem. They do it all. Top End Pest Control is a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business and HubZone certified, serving Guam since 2012. Call them today for a quote, 487-5657, or email topendpest@gmail.com. Check them out on Facebook at Top End Pest Control and give them a like. Top End Pest Control for all your pest control needs.
Hafaday, this is Congressman Sir Nicholas. Your congressional office would like to remind you that pandemic unemployment assistance is set to expire on September 6th of this year. We encourage the people of Guam to seek out active employment as much as possible, as jobs continue to remain limited, and we want to prevent hardship for our people at the conclusion of the PUA program. Thank you, and see to us, Mahase.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A good way to start a program, Jose.
Yes, it is.
Let's go straight to Jemmy Cotney. Let's see where the editorial is. I'm going to have to read it off the internet, I'm afraid. Jose, can I borrow your paper? Yeah. It's a little hard to print it off the online edition. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this is a commendatory for RevTax. RevTax doing a great job at expanding online services. RevTax is doing a great job of expanding online services. I hadn't noticed. The Department of Revenue and Taxation deserves praise how it has worked diligently to expand the services it provides to customers on the internet. Residents can e-file their taxes, provided that you file the, what is it, the easy, 1040 easy tax for.
It's just called 1040 now.
I mean, the one that you can file online.
Yeah.
I don't think you can file a regular 1040 online.
Yeah, there's no such thing as easy anymore.
No.
Yeah, it's something, yeah.
Yeah, I think you can only file the 1040 EZ.
The simple one.
And that's been around for a few years. That was before Daphne Shimazu's time even. Check on payment status on their federal economic impact payment. Yeah, I haven't done that lately either. and renew their vehicle registration online, which goes back like 15 years, right? This is nothing new. It's something they stopped doing at the beginning of the pandemic. Yeah, but because they just said you don't have to do it at all, remember?
You know what would make the revenue tax really great? Stop charging fees for a credit card.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I don't understand that. Any company that's spending that much money, is processing that much money, can't cut a deal like that is just not trying very hard. That's got to be my sense on the whole thing. And of course, the two utilities will take your credit card payment. And talk about being backward. I can't remember the last time I had a quarter in my pocket. Really, it's just like carrying a pocket full. I used to, once upon a time, I thought state of the art was a pager and a pocket full of quarters.
Ancient times, Bob.
Yeah, because, you get a page and then you find the nearest payphone and away you go. But, it's like carrying a pocket full of washers around, just useless tokens, basically.
Oh, I bet some people can't even fit anything in their pockets these days.
Probably not. So, if you really want to do something, and then this editorial goes on to say, business can e-file gross receipts tax. Again, that goes back a long, long time. And information for State Wage Income Collection Agency, SWICA, and that goes back a long time. And submit W3W, W2GU wage data in a standard format defined by Social Security Administration online. They can also renew business licenses, submit vehicle inspection reports. That's how you renew your... Wow, I wonder who wrote this thing.
I didn't want to break this to you, Bob, but it's actually 1999.
It's an old new... You didn't give me today's paper.
I might have gave you an old edition.
Yeah, one of your collector's items. Yeah, and that goes way... the innovation, probably 2010 or so, you take your car into an inspection station, you don't even need the paper because they will send it to RevTax. Most insurance companies are signed up with RevTax. This is nothing new here at all, except a new director. And even that, not so new after all. And very soon, residents won't have to wake up before the sun rises just to get in line early to renew and replace driver's licenses. That would be nice. The agency plans to launch online portal in mid-September for driver's license services. Until then, RevTax walk-in services and real IDs will be more limited, like you can't get them, due to training for the program, said Arthur Mano, acting supervisor of the driver's license examination branch. We're going to ask the public to bear with us for about another month, he said. An automatic extension was issued by RevTax for driver's license that expired between September 1, 2019 and December 31, 2021. That extension expires December 31, Mano said, and many people seem to be flooding agency offices in Barragatas to get renewals. Walk-in services are needed because due to the shutdown of services for months after the pandemic hit, the earliest appointment available on RevTax website is late June of next year. The first word here, commend. And then the 17th failure and the 14th thing they're trying to take credit for that was done by previous directors. The agency advised people who want to walk in that they should be prepared by bringing chairs and drinks to enduring hours in line before they can be seen. The online option will shorten wait times and make it much easier and convenient to get a driver's license replaced or renewed. The RevTax and other agencies expand their online, as RevTax and other agencies expand their online services, they also need to look at giving customers more options in which to submit payments beyond a credit card, like they're doing that now, such as PayPal or other online payment. What a dumb editorial.
You know, once again, someone sent me the content that didn't make the editorial, and they wanted to commend RevTax for upgrading from the TRS-80s to the Commodore 64.
Yeah.
It's much faster.
It's much faster, yeah. Wow, if this is what you got to do to get commended, you know, there's a radio store downtown that sells crystal radios. They should be commended for being state-of-the-art, right?
Transistors.
Yeah, and that store that sells black and white TVs. Yeah. Okay, now let's take a look at the Post. And Ray called it this morning. There's going to be, here it is. It was in the wrong folder.
Oh.
Sorry about that, Jose.
You might need to upgrade your folders, Bob.
Yeah, my folder's kind of falling apart. This is the PDN folder. It was in the right folder. It just didn't look hard enough. All right, so let's go to the Post. It takes witnesses to speak up and help save the lives of children. Witnesses? I don't think so. On Saturday morning, 2 bystanders chose to do the right thing when they saw a boy in distress in Dededo at the corner of Wostick Road and Chalon Escuela. The boy, 13, was barefoot, wearing what appeared to be improvised underwear. He had a rope on his waist and there were injuries to his wrists and ankles, prosecutors said in court documents. An adult, the editorial says, an adult man would later go. An adult man? Wouldn't an adult man just be an adult? An adult man would later go after. Well, I suppose in this era of wokeism. Well, no, wait a minute.
You're maturity shaming, Bob.
Yeah, if you just say an adult, then you don't need to get into gender, right?
That's
so
right.
This is wrong because it's redundant and wrong because it's not woke. An adult would later go after and shove the boy into a vehicle, claiming the boy was simply being disciplined. The 2 bystanders had a choice to make at that point. Go about their normal lives that Saturday morning or call the police. The call to authorities ultimately led to the rescue of the 13-year-old and his older brother, 16. That helped police uncover the horrific abuses against the 2 teen brothers. They'd been tied up for days until they could barely move or breathe, deprived of food, and subjected to other forms of abuse, the prosecution alleged in court documents. The alleged abuses were in a house that had multiple people living in it, according to police officers, quoted in documents. Police would later find out the boys had been tied up multiple times over the past years. The older boy had a badly infected wound. When gauze was removed, it exposed flesh, bacteria buildup, and a smell of decay, according to court documents. Officers and medics observed the older boy had lacerations to his left and right calves that were deep enough to place an extension cord inside, and bruising to his left eye. A man and woman who are known to the boys were arrested, charged, but were later released. David Michael Martinez Kanata, 37, and Sherry Antoinette Tyrone Nauta. I wonder if David Michael Martinez Kanata, 37, was the adult male that put the boy in the car.
Doesn't sound very adult to me.
Yeah. The defendants, like all the defendants who face charges in court, are presumed innocent until proven guilty. But the new and old injuries on the boys and scars that show they've been tied up are not in dispute. The two boys are now safely in the custody of the government. I don't like this sentence at all. The two boys are now safely in the custody of the government. Through Child Protective Services, and hopefully they'll ultimately be able to find a home that will care for them, give them warmth, and make them feel they are loved. It's going to take a long time for these boys to trust adults who will be in their lives moving forward. But we hope the example of the adults who called the police will help them begin to see that not all people inflict harm on children. We don't know what the circumstances were in the house where the two boys lived, but we do know is that the phone call that the two strangers made alerting authorities saved the boys from further harm. We have also learned that when the boys were much younger, November 2014, the same man, now for consistency's sake, shouldn't we say the same adult man?
Maybe he was an adult in 2014.
Well, it's 37 now. Do the math, Jose. Who faces charges in connection with the alleged abuses that were recently discovered, was also arrested on suspicion of child abuse against the same children. In the 2014 case, the suspect was simply given a notice to appear in court by 2017. Justice delayed is justice denied. However, there are no records in the judiciary of Guam that show the case against Kanata was pursued in court. It never went before a judge. Wow. 7 years ago, there was the possibility that the children could have been taken from an abusive environment. But it didn't happen that way, and it took the desperation of a 13-year-old child to run, hoping someone would help. There is a lot to learn from this, including for the justice system and for neighbors, friends, and strangers. Sometimes it takes a good Samaritan to make that call that can save someone, or in this case, two children. Well, yeah, and that's commendable behavior, but these people weren't witnesses. No, they were, what's the word I want to use here? They were protectors is what they were. They protected the boy by calling the cops. They were, a witness would be someone who says, look at that. Yeah, a rope around his waist. Yeah, he's pretty well banged up. What's for lunch?
And then they get a call. Did you see something?
Well, yeah, I did. Okay, well, then you could be a witness at trial. Yeah. Okay, no blue star for you guys today. And then we've got another editorial here. This time is by Frenchie. And if I didn't deal with it in the editorial page, in Zemi Kotny, it could be Frenchie versus Friedman. Yeah. Here's how it's titled. Let's remind ourselves of Roosevelt's words. There's nothing to fear but fear itself. After finishing Dr. Friedman's condescending, value signaling, self-indulging lecture to the editor on August 13, my first reaction was one of dread and profound malaise. Not long after my initial emotional reaction to this nauseating letter, my Cartesian sign took over. Cartesian means that you develop a different viewpoint and you view yourself from afar. You take an objective view of your own self. René Descartes. Yeah, so Frenchie said, well, let me take a look at myself here instead of this.
He had an out-of-body experience.
I suppose. Yeah. And apparently then he reversed himself and remanded to his right hand to do some writing. I became thankful that this pandemic has allowed us to see in a new light the unsavory truth about many in the medical profession, who until now had garnered most people's respect. What this situation has revealed is the dual nature, the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde dilemma of too many members of the medical society. As Descartes pointed out, and many scientists ever since, science is constantly in motion, in evolution. It's at the core of its own existence. It never stagnates. It doesn't bring certitudes, but rather allows us to address new questions and challenges. I've been saying that over and over again. Every time I hear somebody say, the science is settled, the National Academy of Dumbasses, by a vote to 996 to 4, decided that cattle flatulence causes global warming. The science is settled.
Oh, I didn't know science was majority vote.
Yeah, well, anytime you see this majority vote, they're not talking about science. They're talking about something else. Science is not a democracy. It is truly a dictatorship. The guy who comes up with the experiment that can be replicated becomes the dictator. He tells you what the science is for this right now. One could expect that those of us who wrap themselves in the cloak of knowledge would therefore be open-minded and compassionate. It's like me. and proud of their humility, right? Yeah. Instead, Dr. Friedman gave us a magisterial demonstration of narrow-mindedness, preconceived biases, and sufficiency rarely seen in the open. The type of generalization and gross respect for his own version of what he thinks is a basket of deplorables. Yeah. Is unacceptable for anyone as a matter of principle, but it's contemptuous and reprehensible coming from a member of the medical community. This intervention has brought to the fore and into full light an arrogance, contempt, and sense of superiority more in line with a Dr. Mengele rather than the compassionate, self-effacing, loving approach. Yeah, the compassionate, loving approach of a Dr. Schweitzer. You know the name Schweitzer? In Switzerland, they have 4 languages. French, Italian, one called Romansh, and and German, which they call Schweizerdeutsch.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. And someone who is from Germany, or who's from Switzerland, who has a German name from that part of Switzerland, would be referred to not as a Swiss, or not as a, let's see, how would the Post do it? An adult Swiss. He would be a Schweitzer.
Dr. Swiss person.
Yeah, Dr. Swiss adult person. Yeah. So rather than the compassionate, self-effacing, and loving approach of a Dr. Schweitzer, these offer strikingly opposite approaches to medicine. The first one, that's Dr. Mengele, was the stooge of the eugenics medical philosophy at the service of a despicable ideology that ventured into the most extreme experiments under the guise of science. Yeah, he was part of the Nazi regime, the medical experiments, etc. Der Weißengel, the white angel.
Eugenics.
Yeah. The other was a polymath. A polymath is someone who is extremely knowledgeable in many, many subjects. A physician and a theologian, a writer, a humanitarian, a philosopher, a musicologist, and the recipient of the 1952 Nobel Peace Prize for his work, quote, Reverence of Life. Dr. Schweitzer continued to care for the poor, the needy, the forgotten until his death. Sadly, it's not hard to see who Dr. Friedman's narrow views and contempt align with. Whoa, that's a heavy rap. Too many politicians, pundits, and medical doctors have used fear to advance not a science-based approach, but one of vilification, blame, and opposition to one another to promote a narrow, medieval, almost cultist, blind, and uninspired agenda. Frenchie, you know, and this is English.
He does know Roger.
Yeah, well, you know, if he can do this, we can imagine how he writes in French. Wow. Perhaps it's a good time to remind us of the famous, inspiring words of the great Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt when faced by dangers a lot more final than the virus that has made a lot of adults lose their wits and act as frightened children. And this is what Roosevelt said: "There is nothing to fear but fear itself." Let's give Frenchie a big round of applause. You know, with an intellect like that, no wonder he likes calling tall tales. I'll take a short break here, but I've got to perform a function first. I have my blue pen in hand. I have the Post editorial. But today, for the third day in a row, the coveted blue star goes to someone who is not an editor. Congratulations, Frenchie. Okay, let's take a short break.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Diving and seeing our coral reef full of life.
I really love hiking the trails.
I really love going to the beach. The sunsets are amazing.
Your island needs you. Help preserve what makes our island home. Stop those who threaten our wildlife, plants, and environment. Install the free Toka app and report poaching, littering, burning, and other environmental crimes. Call 864-TOKA or install the free Toka app today. This public service announcement is brought to you by the Department of Agriculture, UOGC Grant, and Choice Broadcasting.
Now, more Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie. Spitting truth like watermelon seeds at a summer picnic. Call now, 888-TALK, 888-8255.
Okay, well, here we are with a card. It's pretty quiet in the local scene today, so I'm going to spend some more time with Joe Biden. The whole Afghanistan debacle requires, I think, a certain amount of discussion. I'm going to touch some of the points I touched yesterday, and I have an excellent article written by one of my favorite columnists, Ben Shapiro. If you're familiar with Ben's work, he really knows how to get to the bottom of things, and he like Frenchie, is a good writer. So I've got Ben Shapiro versus Biden, Biden versus Carter, Biden versus the Taliban. I'll talk a little bit more about Public Law 36-34 and the governor and closed-door senators. And then I'll finally get to Siegel versus Scalia, where a law professor named Siegel decides he's going to really lay it out on Mr. Justice Scalia. Not that I haven't done the same thing myself. He's not my favorite justice by a long shot. Siegel is kind of comical. It's kind of like saying, we don't like that football player because every game he scores 5 or 6 touchdowns. And that basketball player is, he has nothing but my contempt. He throws in 3-pointers with carefree abandon. That's kind of how it goes. And then if I get to it, I've got the woke versus the rest of us, the media cartel versus the courts. I might even get to Tall Tales versus Rapinoe. So let's start out with Ben Shapiro. It's a little bit on the long side, but if you really want to know what happened in Afghanistan, this is it. Shapiro, here's what went wrong in Afghanistan and what we should have done differently. Well, I already know what we should have done differently. We should have elected Trump last November. That's where we went really wrong.
I heard someone say, Trump's ego would not have allowed this to happen.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And Trump is a member, and most of his party are people that like the country they live in, if not love the country they live in. So many of those folks in that other party will show you nothing but contempt for their own country. And by the way, I can't wait till Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib tell us about Afghanistan and what a wonderful thing it is that Muslims are now in charge of their own country. And like Frenchie with his Cartesian moment here, in a sense, the Taliban are doing us all a favor because, there are so many people. Islam is a religion of peace. We all worship the same God, which is not true. Mohammed was a great, was a great person. And the Taliban now is showing all of this stuff up as a lie. We're really getting to see what Islam is like when they're unfettered by any Western constraints. Shapiro, here's what went wrong in Afghanistan and what we should have done differently. We are currently watching one of the greatest and most horrible debacles in the history of the United States unfold in Afghanistan. This debacle has both causes and consequences. The causes range from mission creep to myopia, from foolishness to cowardice. The consequences will reverberate from Afghanistan to Taiwan to the United States itself. You can bet that the Red Chinese are saying, hey, you guys over there in Taiwan, why don't you come home and be part of your mother country? You think that Joe Biden is going to defend you?
Nope.
Yeah. To understand just what has happened and what comes next, we must examine the current collapse in Afghanistan from 3 different perspectives: the tactical, the geostrategic, and moral. Geostrategic, like I just mentioned with Taiwan and Red China. The tactical collapse of the United States. Put aside for the moment the American mission in Afghanistan, whether our full-scale invasion was the right idea, or whether it fell prey to mission creep, or whether indeed the United States should have remained in Afghanistan indefinitely with a skeleton force costing a fraction of America's initial investment. We'll examine such questions presently. Begin with a simple fact. President Biden's precipitous, contingency-free pullout from Afghanistan is one of the most extraordinarily idiotic moves in the history of military interventionism. It's not that Biden chose to pull out, it's how he chose to pull out. I talked a little bit yesterday about retreats, use chosen reservoirs as an example, but when troops retreat, you have to have a rear guard. You have to have cover for those retreating troops. And then obviously you have to have a plan for extracting your rear guard. You don't just say, okay, meet us down at the airport at 7. We're all leaving Afghanistan. On April 14, Biden announced that the United States would begin a final pullout from Afghanistan. It's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home. Now, these were great press releases, right? Got a lot of earned media out of that. Biden stated that the terrorist threat from Afghanistan had been successfully neutralized and explained that the country would not become a base for terror activities again. Biden made the announcement despite an intelligence report that same week predicting that the Taliban would be likely to make gains on the battlefield and the Afghan government will struggle to hold the Taliban at bay if the coalition withdraws support. By Biden's timeline, however, the troops would begin their withdrawal by May 1st. At this point, there were fewer than 3,500 American troops in Afghanistan. It was no longer America's longest war in any technical sense, given that no combat troops had been killed in Afghanistan since February 2020. It's already really wound down. And that the number of American casualties in Afghanistan had dropped to 11 way back in 2015. Yeah. The United States military presence in Afghanistan had been reduced to its lowest footprint since 2001, and the job of the military was to provide technical and air support for the Afghan military. So how did things continue to operate? How did the Afghan military maintain even a semblance of control over any portion of the country? According to the Wall Street Journal, the Afghan military had built its entire mechanism around such support. This is from the Journal, the Afghan army fighting alongside American troops was molded to match the way the Americans operate. The U.S. military, the world's most advanced, relies heavily on combining ground operations with air support, using aircraft to resupply outposts, strike targets, ferry the wounded, and collect reconnaissance and intelligence. That's what we used to call, back in my military days, a combined arms approach. When it became clear that the United States would abandon its air bases in Afghanistan, and along with those air bases, the air support it directly provided the Afghanistan military, the Afghans had literally no capacity to operate anymore. And everyone knew it. Certainly the Taliban knew it. The Wall Street Journal said, in the wake of President Biden's withdrawal decision, the U.S. pulled its air support, intelligence, and contractors servicing Afghanistan's planes and helicopters. That meant the Afghan military simply couldn't operate anymore. And he goes on TV and he says they didn't have the will to fight. Will to fight were those things with wings that fly overhead. It's worse than that, according to the Daily Beast. The Afghan Air Force, the only force capable of supplementing their hundreds of fire bases on the ground spread thin across Afghanistan, relied on foreign contractors for upkeep and maintenance. Biden withdrew them and refused to allow them to remain. It's almost like he's sabotaging his own team.
Setting up for failure.
Yeah. The country's mostly U.S.-provided air fleet was dependent on foreign contractors to assist with the maintenance. As the U.S. withdrawal took hold, the Biden administration refused to allow contractors into the country to service the aircraft, effectively grounding some of the Afghan Air Force at the same time as the U.S. had withdrawn direct air support to Afghan forces. Furthermore, it's common military knowledge in Afghanistan that the Taliban have a fighting season. They only fight in the non-winter. Delaying the American pullout until the weather turned would have at least provided a natural barrier against the lightning invasion the Taliban pulled off. Yeah, but September 11 is not in the winter. So that would have taken away from the headlines, right? Biden refused. Afghan officials had hoped that a drawback time with the beginning of the winter would buy them more time to strengthen defenses against the Taliban. But the Biden administration pushed ahead with its own timeline, and the Taliban's timeline too, of course. The Biden administration had to know all of this was the case. They had removed every single element of support necessary for the Afghan military to even have a fighting chance of retaining any control in Afghanistan. And yet Biden continued to maintain the lie that the Taliban would not retake the country quickly and easily. In July, he lied that we would ensure they have the capacity to maintain their air force. At the same press conference, he famously stated that there was zero comparison between what was happening in Afghanistan and what happened in Vietnam when the Democrat Congress cut off all support for the South Vietnamese government, leading to the fall of Saigon. People forgot that. You know, the United States pulled out of Vietnam in February of 1973. The fall of Saigon wasn't until something like June or July of 2075. Yeah, they lasted for 2 more years, even though the Democrat Congress, you know, even though we had committed to providing them aid, the Democrat Congress cut it off completely. You know, they would rather see Nixon lose than the Vietnamese win, is really what it came down to. Going on with the editorial. The quote, the Taliban is not the North Vietnamese army, the doddering commander-in-chief stated. They're not remotely comparable in terms of capabilities. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of the embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It's not at all comparable. The likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely. We didn't see people on the roof of the consulate like Saigon. We saw people hanging onto the side of C-5 airplanes, you know, and falling to their death.
Yep.
Yeah.
Getting caught in the wheel assembly.
Yeah. But they weren't on the roof of the embassy, that's for sure. Going on to the geostrategic collapse of the United States. All this leads to the second failure for the United States inherent in Americans' Afghanistan collapse. The geostrategic failure. The United States had 2 geostrategic goals in Afghanistan. As Biden declared last month, 2 strategic goals in Afghanistan: the preservation of a base of operations from which to strike terrorist targets, and the continued maintenance of American credibility toward both our enemies and our allies. We have now failed on both fronts. Biden declared last month that one of the primary goals in Afghanistan was to keep Afghanistan from becoming a base from which attacks could be continued against the United States. Now, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, has informed Congress that terror groups are likely to reconstitute in Afghanistan in the very near future. According to Dr. Sajan Gohel of the Asia Pacific Foundation, there are now some 250 to 500 members of Al-Qaeda in Kunar, a heavily forested valley region of Afghanistan. Gohel said that that number is likely to increase, and given the United States' lack of access to any intelligence network and its surrender of all air bases in Afghanistan, as well as Pakistan's newfound quid pro quo with Afghanistan to reject U.S. bases on Pakistani territory, it's quite likely that the terrorist groups will reconstitute quickly in Afghanistan. Then there's the question of American credibility. The West's abandonment of Hong Kong in the face of Chinese aggression last year, the West's continuing desire for a rapprochement with the Iranian mullahcracy, the West's routine appeasement of Russia all speak to the unwillingness of the West and the West's leader, the United States, to stand up for allies anywhere on earth. Afghanistan is simply the latest and by far the most stunning example of abandonment of an American ally. The United States simply walked away from its allies in Afghanistan, leaving tens of thousands of them to meet their fate with no viable opportunity to escape. This was a choice, and an obvious choice. The United States could have maintained a military presence long enough to ensure that those with whom we worked could preserve their lives, and those who didn't wish to live under the auspices of a barbaric 8th century regime could escape. We didn't. We chose not to. Okay, so we're going to listen to The Entertainer. We're going to take a short break. I'm going to break what I'm doing and let Mark make his mark in the middle of this item of the card.
Looking for a seamless medical trip to Manila? St. Luke's Medical Center's Pacific Islands Medical Referral Package offers a convenient end-to-end medical travel service to St. Luke's Global City. With the package, they also provide assistance in the processing of your air travel requirements, airport to hospital transportation, and hospital room upgrades, all for free. To learn more, call Phil MD at 671-637-5433 or visit their office in Tamuning across the Baltej at St. Luke's. We love life.
Mezcla, read all about it. Check out Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tumon for lunch. Serving up some savory seafood specials such as spicy garlic shrimp, candied salmon, or better yet the local favorite, snapper or shrimp escabeche. Available only during lunch hours. Make sure to come down and try these tasty specials and more. Call 969-2652 for more info or to make a reservation. Located at the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tumon, Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. A true taste of Guam.
Again, you play that all the time, Jose. Back home again in Indiana. I'm not going to go through it this time. I'll save you. All right, Mark, go ahead and make your mark.
Hey, Uncle Bob.
Yes, sir.
Hey, so I was just curious. I read this one news story about how China and the Taliban are talking about mineral rights now.
Yeah.
And so is this how Hunter Biden's paying? They're getting their money's worth out of Hunter?
Well, it could very well be. If you're a conspiracy theorist, you figure.
Yeah.
That Hunter whispered in his dad's ear and said, "Dad, let's leave Afghanistan high and dry so that the Taliban can step in and make a deal with China." Rare earth.
Yeah, rare earth minerals, but or I think the more believable scenario is he told his dad to stay in Afghanistan for the next 10 years, and his dad did the exact opposite.
Really? I thought under Hunter was playing his dad like a cheap violin.
You mean like a cheap fiddle?
Yeah, like a cheap fiddle. Or maybe a cheap laptop, but that couldn't be because Hunter can't ever hang on to his laptops, right?
Yeah, that's a good one. All right. Well, you have a good rest of your show and drive safe on the way home. It's still raining out here.
Okay, Mark. Thanks for calling.
Take care.
All right, so back to Ben Shapiro here. And we're talking about American credibility. Our enemies can see what happened and they're moving. China has already signaled that it will recognize the Taliban's rule and will work with the Taliban to increase Chinese influence in the region via its Belt and Road Initiative. China hopes to get its hands on Afghanistan's possible $1 trillion rare earth metals. Yeah. For their part, the Taliban has already signaled that it will work with China and doesn't give a damn about Muslim Uyghurs being imprisoned in Xinjiang. They don't care about that. That's somebody else's Muslims. China's embassy in Afghanistan remains open. China has also solidified relations with Pakistan, presenting a solid face against India, which is our ally. But that's just the beginning. China's Global Times, a communist mouthpiece, chortled, C-H-O-R-T-L-D. I know the word. I really like it. It sounds so great. It works out so well in a sentence. Problem is, I just don't know how to do it. Do you know how to...
If you didn't say it, I think it was obscene.
Yeah. Do you know how to chortle, Jose? I'm going to work on that, I guess. If you happen to know a number one chortler, let me know.
Is that what the kids did back in the day?
I guess so. Okay, so a communist mouthpiece chortled. From what happened in Afghanistan, those in Taiwan should perceive that once a war breaks out in the Straits, the island's defense will collapse in hours and U.S. military won't come to help. As a result, the Democrat Progressive Party of Taiwan will quickly surrender. Indeed, given the window presented by the Biden administration, it would be somewhat of a surprise if China didn't attempt some sort of action against Taiwan in the next few years. Needless to say, that could have an impact on us because China knows that we have weapons aimed at them from here, or we can launch weapons from here. So any combat between Taiwan and China is probably going to have an effect on us. Aren't you glad you voted for Joe Biden over there in the U.S.? Any buyer's remorse here on Guam? Foreign policy abhors vacuums, and the United States has now created one. That means that erstwhile American allies will begin to play footsie with countries like Russia and China, believing that American commitments mean nothing. They have reasons for such suspicions, obviously. We originally went to Afghanistan in order to root out al-Qaeda and depose the Taliban in the aftermath of September 11th. George Bush, this is George W. Bush, announced America's attack on Afghanistan October 7, 2001, stating, "The attack took place on American soil, but it was an attack on the heart and soul of the civilized world. And the world has come together to fight a new and different war. The first, and we hope the only one of the 21st century. A war against all those who seek to export terror, and a war against those governments that support or shelter them." There was no mention of nation building, but in order to prevent the Taliban from simply returning to power, some alternative had to be provided in Afghanistan. the United States chose to foster a nascent democracy. This was a form of mission creep, to be sure, and many of the justifications for the war after its initial phase turned from being ensuring a base for American operations against terror. And I'm going to stop here, break for the big halftime show. Come back. I want to finish this up. This is a really good explanation, but I will interrupt to take calls if anyone has an overpowering desire to help me with it. Thank you.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Some dialogue with the Taliban. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. The White House says they are in communication.
President Biden's national security advisor says it's premature to answer if the Taliban is now the legitimate governing power in Afghanistan.
Right now, there is a chaotic situation in Kabul where we don't even have the establishment of a governing authority.
Jake Sullivan says ultimately it will be up to the Taliban to show the world who they are.
The track record has not been good.
Sullivan says the Taliban has
greatest embarrassment in the history of our country.
We have all of those thousands of Americans over there and others. Biden put us in this position. He should have gotten the civilians out first.
And he tells Fox's Hannity when his administration was negotiating with the Taliban, they made it clear that if any Americans were harmed, there would be an overwhelming military response. The Taliban has ordered Afghan citizens to hand over their weapons and ammunition to authorized Taliban members. If you're planning to book holiday air travel this year, you'll still need a face mask.
A mask mandate on U.S. transportation systems will be extended through January 18th, regardless of vaccination status. The requirement was set to expire next month. A spokesperson for the Transportation Security Administration says the mask directive is to minimize the spread of COVID-19 on public transportation. The face covering requirement applies to passengers at airports, on commercial flights, commuter buses, and rail system.
Fox's Jared Halpern. Thousands of people in Northern California are without power on purpose. Their utility, Pacific Gas and Electric, shutting down some of its transmission lines to prevent sparking and gusty winds and potentially more wildfires. America is listening to Fox News.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
The governor of Texas, who has insisted there be no mask mandates in schools in his state, is now corona positive.
The office of Governor Greg Abbott released a statement saying Abbott undergoes daily testing for COVID, and Tuesday, the test came back positive. The plan is for him to isolate in the governor's mansion. While the statement says Abbott is not experiencing any symptoms and is fully vaccinated, he is still receiving monoclonal antibody treatment from Regeneron. Abbott's office announced this the same day that the state health department requested 5 mortuary trailer trucks from FEMA. As of Tuesday, the state health department reported 4,300 new probable COVID cases, just under 55% of the state's population has had at least one vaccine dose. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
Customs and Border Protection says its agents have seized thousands of fake COVID-19 vaccine cards in dozens of shipments bound for U.S. cities. They say they were easy to spot with poor quality printing and misspellings. A Connecticut college is adding a financial disincentive to unvaccinated students.
Quinnipiac University is threatening students to either get the COVID vaccine, get an exemption, or face a heavy helping of fines. The college sent out an email saying students that don't comply and roll up their sleeves will be charged $100 a week for the first 2 weeks of the upcoming semester. The fines will rise from there. A student who disobeys the vaccine mandate could ultimately pay $2,275 by the end of the semester. A Quinnipiac spokesperson saying so far, 600 students have not uploaded their vaccine information. Tom Graham, Fox News.
Admitting that hackers have accessed some of its billing files, T-Mobile now says they have identified the data taken as being from a file containing data on inactive prepaid cell phone accounts. The company says no customer financial information or Social Security numbers were stolen in the files. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
A homeowner's policy protects much more than just your house. It also protects you against claims from someone being hurt on your property. If a visitor is injured at your place, how much are you covered for? The smart thing to do is get the answer today.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Listen to The Point. Any speaker, anytime. Check us out on your FM radio at 93.3, 104.3 HD3, thepoint.gu, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and tune in. And announcing radio.com. Download the app and hear The Point. Get the latest news, sports, entertainment, and more. On demand. Your phone is digital. Your life is digital. And we are too. 93.3, The Point.
Mescla, read all about it. Check out Mescla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Tucumán for lunch. Serving up some savory seafood specials such as spicy garlic shrimp, candied salmon, or better yet the local favorite, snapper or shrimp escabeche. Available only during lunch hours. Make sure to come down and try these tasty specials and more. Call 969-2652 for more info or to make a reservation. Located at the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tucumán, Mescla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. A true taste of Guam.
Well, here we are after that big halftime show. That means we're in the second half of Tall Tales, and I got a caller on the line here that's called in before, and he once upon a time, I think he may have had occasion to repeat his remarks. But Jose, you know, identical twins have some challenging names sometimes. Like if you got one twin and his name is Phil, what would you call his brother?
Refill.
Yeah. Or if it happened to be a female and her name were Joyce, what would you call her sister?
Rejoice.
Uh-huh. Or if it were a female and her name were Kate, what would you call her? That's pretty easy. Duplicate.
Ah, very good.
Yeah. And if the boy's name were Pete, you would refer to him as
Paul.
Good afternoon, Repeat.
Well, I just don't want to be robbed to pay Paul.
Okay.
And also, you know, if it were fraternal twins, if the girl was Denise, then the guy would be the nephew.
Of course. Of course.
So, anyways, I wanted to share some thoughts on Afghanistan. Something I haven't shared before, a different perspective. Not necessarily addressing all the issues or the current issues that's being talked about. But, you know, I think you can relate to this, Uncle Bob, because you always talk about what you expect from the government, right?
Yes.
You just expect the basic services, and they shouldn't have all that extra fluff.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So I've been down there 3 times, and once in my role, I sat on the acquisition board, which dealt with the money aspect of the war and how we spent it down there. And it was just obscene about how much money we were spending down there, you know. And it struck me that, you know, maybe we're prolonging that war for ulterior motives. I don't know. But, like, for example, I had to attend a meeting with the engineering brigade because one of my collateral duties was I was the detention oversight officer. And one of our jails that we had wasn't up to snuff, so it had to be demolished and rebuilt. So the contractor that won the bid had a meeting with the engineering brigade commander, and I had to attend that meeting. And while we were waiting for the commander, I struck up conversation with the contractor, and he told me that when the war kicked off, him and another guy, he was doing construction back in Washington State, decided to go to Afghanistan and, you know, start bidding on things. And so him and his partner, that was it. That was their whole company, just 2 of them. And they would rotate 6 months in country, 6 months out. That way they didn't have to stay there the whole time. So anyways, he had won the bid to build this 2,000 square foot jail with 8 cells, an office, and some bathrooms. And it cost $750,000 for this wood and tin structure. A little bit of reinforcement, right?
Right.
So we got to talking, and turns out he lived about a mile away from where my house is in Port Orchard, Washington. So we knew a lot of the same people, so on and so forth. And then I said, hey, you know, if you don't mind me asking, you know, how'd you come up with that $750,000? You know, he said, well, $50,000 to pay for labor, $100,000 to pay for equipment and materials, and then we pocket the $600,000. I said, what? He said, yeah, man, it's easy money over here. You know, it's like taking candy from babies. So that scene played itself out over and over again. So the winners of this war is actually a bunch of, you know, contractors, and the losers are the taxpayers. But the real losers are, of course, those who lost their lives.
Absolutely.
But anyways, I just wanted to throw that story out there.
That's a good story, Pete. Pete, you were there more than once, right?
3 times.
And for approximately how long?
Well, the first time when we went in, that wasn't a full year. That was like 6 months, and then the next 2 times I went in for a full year.
Wow. So you got
and different roles each time. One time I was a fobbit, which meant I stayed on Bagram most of the time. But the other 2 times I was out in the remote areas, and we went out on convoys and engaged with the local leaders and stuff like that. But saw all parts of the countries and all parts of the operations, from the belly of the beast all the way out to, you know, out by the Fatah, out by the eastern border. The Fatah is the federally administered tribal areas. It's sort of like a no man's land out there. It's the buffer zone between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
So you've got a pretty good handle on the situation then, right?
Well, what I was allowed to see, yeah, what I was allowed to be involved in.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing that little bit of insight of what went on. I have a feeling that you're not the only one that probably would express that view that that war is good business.
Yeah, one of the supervisors out there was this 18-year-old kid straight out of, for the contractors, 18-year-old kid straight out of high school, and his father was a big manager for Kellogg Brown and Root, and he was making a obscene amount of money, something like $185,000 a year, straight out of high school, and just because his daddy was the big manager.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was a very common thing to see down there.
Wow.
Yeah, and then you had your third-party nationals, like the people coming in from the Asian countries and stuff like that, and those guys were making like $5 a day.
Mm.
But they were working for our contractors.
I see.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was a really big cow that they milked.
Well, I suspect that in addition to some of the others who were disappointed the way things went down, the contractors are probably sorry to see it all end too, huh?
Oh, yeah. No more new toys for them next year.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for calling in and sharing that insight, Repeat.
All right. Thanks, Uncle Bob.
See you later. So back to the editorial, talking about going in not to build a not for nation building, but that was a form of mission creep. And many of the justifications for the war after its initial phase turned from ensuring a base for American operations against terror and continued degradation of Afghanistan's terror housing capacity, the true purpose of the war, toward the humanistic. America's rhetorical approach shifted from realpolitik to Wilsonian democracy building. Realpolitik, which means looking at a geopolitical situation with your own interests being, if not singular, at least paramount, and not doing anything for any reason other than to improve your own position. That's realpolitik. And then, of course, we all know Woodrow Wilson, what his major, when he took us into war in 1917, the one he promised to keep us out of during the election of 1916, he said, we've got to do this to make the world safe for democracy. Probably made it, that war probably did more to make the world unsafe for democracy than just about anything that happened in the 20th century. Okay, going on with Ben Shapiro's piece here. The nation building was an enormous mistake by the Bush administration. By 2009, George W. Bush left office celebrating that Afghanistan has gone from a nation where the Taliban harbored al-Qaeda and stoned women in the streets to a young democracy that's fighting terror and encouraging girls to go to school. While true and worth celebrating, this statement reflected an obvious shift in priorities. America would not have gone to war to allow women, Afghan women, the opportunity to go to school alone. And his shift in priorities allowed opponents of the Afghanistan war to present it as an inherent and continuing mistake, as quixotic, often blundering offense against the human rights it supposedly sought to forward, as evidenced by Barack Obama in 2008, who said, and that requires us to have enough troops that we're not just air raiding villages and killing civilians, which is causing enormous problems there. And as a foolhardy errand in human rights by quasi-isolationist right, as evidenced by Donald Trump in 2016. We made a terrible mistake getting involved there in the first place. Both Obama and Trump negotiated with the Taliban in an attempt to establish enough stability to end the war. A foolish strategy given the Taliban's obvious unwillingness to deal honestly. Both Obama and Trump recognized enough, however, to understand that abandoning Afghanistan without any strategy would result in mass carnage and undermine the true mission in Afghanistan, and so neither precipitously pulled out, as Obama had done in Iraq, leading to ISIS's rise. As Trump said in 2017, my original instinct was to pull out, and historically I like following my instincts. But the consequences of a rapid exit are both predictable and unacceptable. Joe Biden, however, would not allow his responsibility as president to overcome his commitment to perverse ideas about Afghanistan, and so he pulled out. And America's moral failure in Afghanistan has been fulfilled. We have failed ourselves by restoring the rule of precisely the same evil entity that presided over al-Qaeda's September 11 attack. We have failed our allies by subjecting them to slaughter in the streets of Afghanistan. The ghostly images speak for themselves. American helicopters evacuating the American embassy ahead of the onrushing 8th century barbarian Taliban in images all too reminiscent of American helicopters leaving Saigon in 1975. Afghans rushing the airport to escape the onrushing 8th century barbarian Taliban. Afghans clinging to the wheels of American military aircraft at liftoff. Afghans attempting any measure to avoid the murderous theocratic tyranny of the Taliban, dropping thousands of feet to their death. The snippets of information emerging from Afghanistan are even worse. The Taliban apparently going house to house in Kabul, killing pilots and members of the Afghan Special Operations Forces, raping their families and taking their homes. The Taliban seizing control of incredibly sophisticated caches of American military equipment, including drones, Humvees, MRAPs, as well as our $700 million embassy. Tens of thousands of American allies stuck in Afghanistan, unable to escape, waiting for their imprisonment, torture, or death. The Taliban painting over images of women in an attempt to restore theocratic cleansing of women from the public square. Women locking themselves in their houses in fear of return of the Taliban's brutal rule in which female education was forbidden, modesty rules were enforced with a whip, and young girls were married off as child brides. America is not responsible for human rights everywhere. Let me repeat that. America is not responsible for human rights everywhere, but we are certainly responsible for not abandoning those who risked life and limb to help us fight terrorism, turning a country with at least a semblance of a chance into an irredeemable hellhole for some 38 million people, complete with a massively restored terrorist threat to boot. American surrender has consequences. And next on the article here is Biden's insane defense. I think we'll go to Wrigley Field for the 7th inning stretch. And I haven't talked with our Carl since yesterday, so I think it'll be time when I run into him in Wrigley Field.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Starting August 1st, pandemic unemployment assistance claimants must start searching for work to remain eligible for PUA benefits. 3 work searches a week are required. Work searches include registering on HireGuam.com, meeting with employers, submitting resumes and applications, and attending job fairs. Only a few are exempt from the work search requirement. This includes those working reduced hours, those in training programs, and self-employed individuals. Remember, PUA ends September the 4th. Now is the time. Let's rebuild our workforce. For more information, go to dol.guam.gov.
So here we are, Wrigley Field in Chicago, and who do I see sunning himself in the center field bleachers? None other than the most dangerous man in the ballpark. Good afternoon, R. Carl.
Hey, good afternoon, Bob. Yeah, I was wondering what the delay was. I was wondering if the call got dropped or something. I forgot about the music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just called to weigh in on this Afghanistan issue, and it's always interesting hearing Pete's take because he was actually back there, so he has that perspective. So it's always interesting what he says. But I have a feeling that when we got into this, that we some thought that they were going to do something like the Marshall Plan, and sort of build, nation build, Afghanistan into a thriving, modern country in the Middle East. But the difference to me was that in the Marshall Plan, although Germany and Japan were, many large sections were in total ruin, is that especially Germany had centuries of institutional knowledge built up over centuries, and that stuff was still in between their ears. And Japan also had, institutions that they built up. They just need to transfer it to a little bit more of a Western style. Whereas in Afghanistan and in other parts of the Middle East, there's been centuries, in some cases thousands of years of tribalism. And there was a picture of these Taliban in one of the offices. I think it was like the presidential office or something. And someone pointed out the irony that these Taliban were still dressed in these clothing from centuries ago. I think it was like the 1700s or 1600s. And on the wall behind them, there was a painting of tribal men, from centuries ago, the 1600s, with exactly the same clothing, the turbans and the clothing on it, minus the machine guns, of course. But it just illustrates that they're still basically in many ways living in the 16 and 1700s. So overcoming that is really almost an impossibility. I think one of the tragedies is that and I've heard people talk about this, I think Ben Shapiro was one of them, which he spoke that we had trained these Afghan military people to be dependent. We trained them in a system that was dependent on American support for maintenance of the equipment, for some of this was through contractors.
That's what Ben Shapiro said in this piece that I've been reading. Carl.
Yeah, I heard him talking on a video where he was speaking about it. So I guess that was taken. A lot of the thoughts were taken from his opinion piece there.
Yeah.
And then Biden just basically wiped out all that support, including contractor support, just completely cut it off. So, and he was saying that, you had such ridiculous things as people, trying to maintain high-tech equipment, through, on video, video contact, trying to explain how to replace parts, it's just really, just terribly sad. I think you would, so you might rate this among probably the top 5, if not the number 1, the top 5 foreign policy bungles in American history. I mean, it's just terrible. I don't think he'll ever live this down, although the media will try and salvage what they can of his reputation. But this is really...
Well, right now, even CNN is tearing into him. Everybody is... He's not getting any slack from anybody, which is right. But how long it will last is another question.
Yeah, this is only 7 months into his administration, which is remarkable. I posted something on my Facebook page. I said that only 7 months into the Biden administration, and he's already beat out Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama as the worst president in American history.
Yeah, the Franklin Pierce Society has had a rebirth.
Yeah, so it's an amazing achievement, because that takes some real commitment. Jimmy Carter set a very high bar.
True enough.
Or maybe a low bar. I don't know how you'd phrase it, but it's a tragedy all around. When you see these pictures of people falling out of the sky from transport planes, it's a tragedy beyond imagination. Just horrible, and people, just thousands of people crowding into these, these airports in Afghanistan, desperate to escape what's coming. Oh well, like Barack Obama said one time, elections have consequences.
Well, we found that out, didn't we?
Yeah, the hard way. Anyway, Bob, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Okay, Carl. Well, we're going to find out what Frenchie has to say next, and I suspect Frenchie will be extremely knowledgeable and insightful on this subject. Good afternoon, Frenchie. Great article in the Post, and
Oh, thank you. I'm not worthy of that blue star, but I'm humble. Not as humble as you, but.
Yeah,
I'm very proud to be humble too.
Very good.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the things that you read and some of the people share is true about Afghanistan. One thing that is being totally overseen right now is that the vice president of the country never left the country, so in theory he's in charge. But basically the president, before he left, had changed the whole military apparatus and everything because he didn't trust them. So we still don't know where he is. He's probably in India or something like this. But what you have is there is an area that the Taliban are not controlling, and it's roughly, give or take, because they took Mazar al-Sharif in the northern part, which is the Uzbek area. It's a big town, which the CIA had conquered quite fast as soon as they intervened. And they had allied themselves with what was called the Northern Alliance. Now, the Northern Alliance was an anti-Taliban alliance of people that were very disparate, because the leader of the Tajik, who was called the Lion of Pamir, his name was Ammar Shah Massoud, who was assassinated 2 days before 9/11. So on 9/9, he was killed by Al-Qaeda commando that were posing as journalists and exploded a bomb that was hidden in their camera. And his son has now taken over, and 2 of his brothers are still in there, and one of his former defense minister was the vice president of the country just before everything collapsed, and he has returned to the Panjshir Valley, which is right in the back of the Hindu Kush, that huge mountain, which is part of the disputed area with India and Pakistan. And they also control that very strange, if you look at a map of Afghanistan, they also control what is called the Duck Bill. It's kind of a narrow piece of land that widens, and it touches China. And China has built some roads there and everything, but it's still controlled by the people of the Northern Alliance. And people like Dostum, who was a warlord who had sided with the Soviets, but then allied himself with the Tajiks. So you have 3 major ethnic in that area: the Uzbek, which are basically on the other side of the border of Uzbekistan, the Tajik, who are on the other side of the Tajikistan, and then the Hazara, who have been probably the most discriminated against minority in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a mosaic of different ethnics, and they are basically Turkomans background, like the Uzbeks. The Tajiks have a Persian background. The Pashtun, who makes the large majority of the Taliban, are also of Persian background. And then, of course, in the southern part by Iran, the southwestern part, you have the Baluch, and the Baluch are very warlike people that are very unstable, and actually exploded a few Chinese buses just about 3 weeks ago in Pakistan. So there is still a lot of things that can happen, and as a Second Amendment fan, you will see that one of the first things that the Taliban have asked to do is people to give away their guns.
Yeah.
So we're going to see some drama, because apparently we still have a lot of civilians that are stuck there. We have the potential for a huge hostage-taking that would make the Iranian affair look like a walk in the park. And then we have a potentially growing resistance to the Taliban with the re-emergence of the Northern Alliance, which, by the way, George Bush had betrayed after they had helped us get rid of the Taliban and put Hamid Karzai in their place. And they didn't like Karzai. Karzai was a little restaurant owner somewhere in Virginia, and they brought him in to be their puppet there, even though he used some of the Tajik as prime minister and minister of defense. So there are a lot of things that's going to happen there. One of that could be a good thing is that China, because they want to open that Silk Road to the Pakistanis port on the Indian Ocean, really want to go through Afghanistan. But then, as we know, the Afghans do not like foreigners. And so China could be ending up replacing the U.S. in Afghanistan as the evil foreigner. And they are not going to be happy with the Tajiks and the Uzbeks recreating that alliance. So it's going to be very interesting to watch. Besides the disaster of the withdrawal or the lack of withdrawal, the biggest shoe that fell was Bagram Air Force Base, where we kept about 5,000 terrorists in the prison, and we just left overnight. So, and all those people are now out in the nature, and the idiot in charge of the Pentagons just won the Senate committee that, oh, by the way, those people could be trying to seek revenge. But we could have moved them to someplace else, and they did not. Now, of course, the Taliban are backed up financially by countries that are supposed to be our allies, Qatar and Saudi Arabia, because they proselytize Sunni Islam. And of course, in Afghanistan, you have both Sunni and Shia, so you're going to have a lot of trouble. The Northern Alliance regular backers are India, Turkey, Italy, and France. So it's going to be interesting how that thing turns out. The president of Turkey has already said that if they are asked, they will give military assistance to a Northern Alliance. So it's very interesting. Of course, Turkey is very interested by the greater Turkish Empire, which goes all the way to the Chinese border. So, and the Uyghurs are Turkmens, so that could become very interesting very fast. But in the meantime, we're sending all the wrong message, especially to the Chinese. And the big dangers for us here on Guam, of course, is Xi and his people misreading our exit of Afghanistan as a sign of weakness and overplaying their hand, which could put us in a lose-lose situation. So that was my 2 points on this.
As usual, Frenchie, very comprehensive and with a great deal of depth. So I thank you for chiming in and helping us out with this.
Yeah. It's going to be, it's going to be a lot of emotions going on, especially with what's going on in Kabul. But apparently they're already hunting door to door for people that work with the NATO alliance that was there for many years. Around Bagram, which was where the Brits used to be, they are hunting people that used to work for the Brits and the Germans and things like this. So we'll see what's going to happen. We saw the Australian taking out some of the people that helped them, but the United States is way behind, and they totally messed up this thing completely. I mean, the Pentagon and the Department of State should be cleaned up of all those inept people, but unfortunately I think they will just go and work for some universities or something. And so it's not going to be boring, let's put it that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, Francie. Good talking to you again.
Yeah, good talking, and thank you for the Blue Star.
Okay, Frenchie. So, it's an extremely complicated situation, but we elect presidents to deal with really complicated situations. We have a State Department that's supposed to be able to handle the various diplomatic aspects of our foreign policy. We have, I don't know how many intelligence gathering agencies, the Defense, the CIA, and a couple in the Department of Defense, and each military, and et cetera. So we're supposed to have the kind of intelligence gathering capability that could help us make plans to not get caught like we are here in Afghanistan. Now, I did see one post on the internet that a couple of people in the Pentagon offline said that the military counseled the president, military officers counseled the president against what he was doing, but the White House took it over and decided how this was going to be done. And it looks like something that the White House operations. So the next thing that Ben Shapiro talks about is Biden's insane defense. The utter disconnect between the Biden administration and the reality on the ground in Afghanistan was crystal clear as this week terrifying events unfolded. As the Taliban overran Kabul, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced, quote, "The U.S., the international community, and the Afghan government must do everything we can to protect women and girls from inhuman treatment by the Taliban." Everything we can, question mark. We had just withdrawn the only protective force from Afghanistan. The State Department issued a just statement with dozens of other countries announcing the Afghan people deserve to live in safety, security, and dignity. We are in the national community stand ready to assist them. Stand ready to assist them? We just abandoned them. Then there was Biden himself. As the tragedy unfolded, the White House tweeted out a picture of Biden sitting in the Situation Room. It's an extraordinarily feeble image of an extraordinarily feeble presidency. Initially, the White House announced that Biden wouldn't speak about the situation for a few days. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki similarly announced via automated email that she was on vacation.
Of course.
Why not? Then slammed with a complete and utter collapse not only of Afghanistan but his presidency, Biden rushed back to the White House to deliver a speech that could be best summed up as "the buck stops everywhere else."
He was channeling his inner Pontius Pilate.
Well, he was channeling his inner Harry Truman, who used to have a sign in his desk.
The buck stops
here.
here.
The buck stops here. And, you know, Harry only had a 25% approval rating when he and Bess jumped in their own car and drove back to Independence, Missouri, and moved back into the same house they lived in before Harry was elected senator. Yeah. But you got to give him a lot of credit, and historians gave him a lot of credit after he was out of office. He was a no BS kind of guy. And when he said the buck stop here, it really did. President Biden, the buck stops over there. You guys over there, did you see the buck stopping over at your place? Sounding rambling and defensive, Biden began by explaining that his team was moving quickly to execute plans we had put in place to respond to every contingency, including the rapid collapse we're seeing now. This was clearly untrue, as stated. Tens of thousands of American allies remain on the ground and will remain there either as prisoners or corpses. Then Biden got into the excuse-making. First, he made the utterly specious argument that the only reason we remained in Afghanistan was for nation building, blustering it was never supposed to be creating a unified central democracy. As for the renewed terror threat from Afghanistan, that threat had already been degraded, and America's removal from the region would not hamper that effort, as we have seen, an extraordinarily dubious claim. Biden then tried to use as examples Americans' counterterrorism Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Al-Nusra in Syria, ISIS attempting to create a caliphate in Syria and Iraq and establishing affiliates in multiple countries in Africa and Asia. These are all things that we stopped. In each of these scenarios, the United States has a military force on the ground in arena, at the very least, as in Somalia, assisting allied forces against terrorism. We just removed our capacity to do the same in Afghanistan, despite Biden's protestations to the contrary. All right, let's head for Churchill Downs, Jose, and let me see who I'm going to be talking to when I leave the racetrack. Dr. Ron McNinch.
Hafaday, this is Congressman St. Nicholas. Your congressional office would like to remind you that pandemic unemployment assistance is set to expire on September 6th of this year. We encourage the people of Guam to seek out active employment as much as possible, as jobs continue to remain limited, and we want to prevent hardship for our people at the conclusion of the PUA program. Thank you, and see to us, Mahase.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael F.Q. San Nicolas.
Circle K brings you the G-Dog. Get ready for a succulent and flavorful street hot dogs made famous in New York City. These dogs are made with 100% all beef and cooked in a delicious blend of spices for a plump, juicy hot dog experience that's bursting with flavor. Visit your nearest participating Circle K and dig in on the best hot dog experience on island. The G-Dog, served from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Available at Anigua, Denado, and Ocean Vista Circle K locations only. Circle K, hey, take it easy.
So here we are, Churchill Downs in Louisville, Kentucky. I got about 9 minutes to go here today. Ron McNinch is going to help me ride down the home stretch, right, Ron?
Hey, happy day, Senator. Happy day, Guam. Oh, absolutely. It's always a pleasure to call in and say hi to you in the afternoons. Hey, you know, I got to tell you, for me, well before this disaster started happening, was when they openly announced that they wanted to leave on like September 11th, 2021.
Yeah.
That to me, I'm like, oh my God, what are they talking about? I just couldn't believe it. And to me, that signaled, it was like a foreshadowing of a disaster to come.
I agree.
It was just incredible. I have to say that they were trying to avoid looking like leaving Saigon and everything else, and really I think what they ended up doing is exactly that. Even providing, because we're in a modern social media age now, they ended up providing the world even more powerful imagery than Saigon could have ever produced, because now it's not just one or two cameras and one or two people making comments. It's thousands and thousands of angles and views that are all showing very detailed kinds of experiences people were having leaving Afghanistan. And just the people on the runway, I could not believe it. They were trying to run alongside of the aircraft. And Sean Hannity, I think on Fox, showed quite a long clip about what was going on at the airport there. It was just absolutely incredible. But wow, so I'm very, very saddened to see all of the, all of the trouble that's going on there right now, because it didn't have to happen this way. There could have been if America wanted to totally leave and leave in an orderly fashion, there's a way to do it, and we simply chose not to.
You don't telegraph your moves to the enemy. That was even our Carl picked up on that when it was first announced. So you know what could have happened is that they could have made plans and started moving people around and moving them out very quietly, very inauspiciously, and then had a concrete plan in place that would have removed those who needed to leave before we pulled out, and we would pull out on an uncertain date so that no one would know exactly when we were going to pull out. I mean, that's just common sense, isn't it, Ron?
Absolutely. And we would have had the courtesy to inform and include our NATO allies what were going on, what our intentions were, what they needed to do to protect their own people. I mean, there was a number of very important coordination steps that should have happened even withdrawing one person. These very important steps should have been taken, and they simply weren't.
Yeah. Yeah, Ben Leon Guerrero puts a post up. What happened to OPSEC? Operational security. We don't need no OPSEC, right? Go ahead, Ron.
Oh, they were doing the exact opposite of OPSEC. They were in the kick me in the pants as I'm heading out the door sec, if we want to call it that.
Yeah.
This was a total kick me sign on our entire presence in Afghanistan. And we let them do it. And when they started kicking us, we let them continue to do it. There wasn't. They had 9 months, and in fact, what really bothers me is not that America left Afghanistan; it's the way that they left. I think that's what should bother everyone, because it simply was not done in a manner that really reflects any sense of responsibility on our part on a number of levels. And this is very, very sad. But I'm always disappointed when government, not only when government doesn't work well, when it simply works bad. And I think this was a good example of bad government. You mentioned President Franklin Pierce earlier in the show. Well, I would add James Buchanan along the same line.
Yeah.
We've had presidents that have been total disasters. They probably should have never been in office. And I wish that President Biden had simply either had better advice, and I do hope whoever was giving him the advice on this particular move, they get fired and they get sent out of the White House or sent out of their jobs because of their incompetence. This was a totally incompetent set of moves, and it's just very, very sad. America has had other withdrawals from places that were done appropriately. It's a bit of a sore sticking point for some, but when the U.S. pulled out of Subic and Clark, it was done in a very deliberate fashion, in a way that didn't cause major ripples in the safety and security of those that were being evacuated. I think that and at that time there was Mount Pinatubo that had just blown up, and it was causing a lot of not only security issues but safety issues. There's simply ways to evacuate and pull your forces out, and that basically doesn't put everybody at risk. My fear is we're going to see a couple of thousand U.S. citizens being held hostage there by these little factional groups that's just going to create a series of headaches for the entire United States on a number of foreign policy levels. That's the sad part about it. And it didn't have to be this way.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's going to get worse before it gets better, because other organizations, other countries, other bad people will see this as an example of the United States unwillingness to do the right thing, or to do things right either.
Yeah, that's part of the kick me sign thing that I think America is basically done. We've basically put a sign on our back to any little, corrupt country in the world that wants to take a pot shot at us. And that doesn't help anyone. That's to our security detriment. I believe that.
I used to ask this question of people who had an anti-American bias. My question was, do you think the world would be a safe place if the United States were weak? And even hard left liberals would say, well, no, I don't think so. Unfortunately, we're going to find out, aren't we, Ron?
Right, and I think we're going to relive many of the Carter years in the next few years. We had the same conditions with Jimmy Carter back in the late 70s, and it's just unfortunate. It's just really, really sad. So that's my 2 cents for it. Thank you so much.
Good talking to you, Ron.
Okay, thank you, sir.
See you tomorrow, folks.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Some dialogue with the Taliban. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. The White House says they are in communication.
President Biden's national security advisor says it's premature to answer if the Taliban is now the legitimate governing power in Afghanistan.
Right now, there is a chaotic situation in Kabul where we don't even have the establishment of a governing authority.
Jake Sullivan says ultimately it will be up to the Taliban to show the world who they are.
The track record has not been good.
Sullivan says the Taliban has agreed to safe passage for civilians fleeing to the airport for evacuation flights, but acknowledged reports of some people being turned away or beaten.
Fox's Jared Halpern, a White House spokesman, quoted as saying 1,100 Americans and family members have now been airlifted out of Kabul. President Biden returned to the White House last night, cutting short his Camp David vacation. Former President Trump says the U.S. has never been so humiliated as in the last few days, and says what's happened will impact foreign relations.
This is something that it will affect our relationships for years to come and decades to come. I will say, when China watches this, they're so happy and they're laughing at us. They're laughing.
The former president on Fox's Hannity. And there are now questions about President Biden's ability to govern.
Florida Senator Rick Scott asking, is Joe Biden capable of discharging the duties of his office, or has time come to exercise the provisions of the 25th Amendment? Added former U.S. Embassy leader in Afghanistan, Ryan Crocker, I'm left with some grave questions in my mind about his ability to lead our nation as commander-in-chief.